What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me, saying he has all this money and he tells me when he's done drinking and he's not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I'm done arguing with him. Will not be serving him and his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The freaking bartender. Now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule. Don't pee off your bartender. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties. It would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him that's fine. Don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily I didn't have to take the work. I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything, and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation, that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. I work as a freelance writer. I have clients try to pull this crap with me too. I can get it cheaper. Yeah, you can. Your work probably won't be done right and I won't be wasting my time with an underpaying client. It's like they have no concept at all that they are actively doing me a favor by bothering someone else with their nonsense. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. In my professional experience, it is exceedingly rare to be fired by a client who don't want to fire you. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I check their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1-2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threaten to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window. So the customer demands to speak to her supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. The customer tries to argue with me, threaten to never use the service again. So we agree. Great. My boss calling me at 7 AM on a Saturday to ask if I could lay some flooring for a friend of his at nearly half my normal rate. Yeah, hard pass Andy. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to a liquidation company, meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. Worked in a cell phone store, both selling devices and service contracts in the UK. Some kid, 19ish maybe, came in with a much shorter man who I later learned was his dad. For whatever reason, I forget what now, he wanted to cancel out of a contract he was part way through. Now I could already tell from the way the kid explained it in exasperated terms that he knew he couldn't cancel out of it, but his dad wasn't taking his word for it and had dragged him in to try and sort it out for him. The contracts clearly state you can't cancel prematurely without paying off the rest of your dues, which I explained, and his father just went full boomer rage mode on me, spitting, frothing, hailing vitriol. This guy clearly thought this was how you got things done. I stared him down, waited for him to finish, and repeated the contractual terms as stated. He hit me back with "I'll report you for violating the Sale of Goods Act." Sucks to be him because I had that be memorized. I made a point of it. In fact, after the first few customers in my early days tried to bring it up to get their own way, some chode on the internet had made posts about how you could sling the term around and usually scare retailers into doing what you want because they don't know it either, so it happened a lot even when there was absolutely no call for it. I just looked at him and said, "Sure, go ahead. You can even use our phone," and pointed at the store phone right next to him. I knew he didn't have a leg to stand on and any trade commissioner listening to his claim would laugh him off the line. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to proceed. After a moment of blank staring, he just turned and stormed out with his son rolling his eyes so far back into his head he could probably see his own brain in embarrassment at his dad's tantrum. I had a short stint as private investigator who specialized in providing investigative services to public defenders. We had this one county that was notorious for a sheriff's department that would make BS traffic stops as a pretext to search vehicles. One deputy in particular came up time and time again for this kind of thing. I was asked to interview this deputy for a defense attorney. Deputy had some of the worst report writing skills I've ever seen, riddled with grammar and spelling errors. Quite often, deputy wouldn't even include the reason he pulls people over in his reports. So I go to interview the guy. As part of the process, there's a senior sheriff's rep there that basically is supposed to protect deputies from people like me and keep them from saying things they shouldn't. We sit down and I pull out his report he wrote on the stop he made on my client's defendant. I've already marked it up, English teacher style, with a red pen and start with, "I had some trouble understanding your report." I proceeded to go error by error for the purpose of clarifying the report. He's getting redder and redder. I then go into trying to determine why he pulled over the defendant because it's unclear in the report. He's not able to give a definitive response. All the while, the sheriff's rep, whom I've worked with a lot and who I have seen be very vocal protecting deputies in interviews like this in the past, is silent. Ultimately, charges against client are dropped. Months later, I'm driving through the area on the way home from camping, not speeding or breaking any traffic laws. I get pulled over by deputy. It's the same deputy. He recognizes me immediately, stammers and manages to say, "It's almost dusk. Turn on your headlights." He gets back in his vehicle and takes off before I've even started my engine. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, "Get the frick out," and the customers went, "You can't say that. This isn't your theater. We're customers." Mall security guy promptly said, "This is my mall, and I can do whatever the frick I want." I love that security guard and I hope he gets nothing but the best in life, as he deserves. Absolute king crap. I work in an NHS hospital. No one pays anything out of pocket for treatment here. It's all paid for through taxation. A patient was added onto our clinic who had paid one of our doctors for surgery privately at another hospital, but she was getting her follow-ups free on the NHS. Technically this shouldn't happen, but it does. These patients can be a bit difficult. This lady's appointment was at 8:55 before we even started at 9 o'clock. She had her workup done when we actually clocked in and was all snooty about waiting 5 whole minutes, bearing in mind she's saving a fortune. Then one of the nurses from the ward called and an actual NHS patient needed seen urgently, so they were brought up and seen ahead of the private patient. Well, this woman went mental, started shouting and bawling that she'd paid all this money and she demanded service. Our charge nurse went out, demanded to know who had taken money off of her, really drilled the patient to point to the person who had dared take money off of an NHS patient. Well, the woman went beetroot, stuttered that she had paid the other hospital, and the charge was like, "Exactly. Your money is no good here and doctor is being paid by the taxpayer to see this emergency patient first, so kindly sit down and be quiet or leave my department until you can be civil." I work as a nurse in the States. but I absolutely will take no crap when I'm charged. I pay for your salary, honey, I don't give a rat's butt. Your $50 copay isn't going to stop this other patient from having a heart attack right now, so sit down. My dad is 6 feet 3 inches. I'm 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Sometime in my early teens, I shot past him. Dad was a yeller, not doing what he thought I should be. No discussion, just yell. But I realized at some point that he wouldn't yell at me if he had to look up while he was doing it. I don't remember what our last argument was about. I just remember that I'd sort of caught on at this point. So I'm in my room in front of the computer. Dad comes in and starts yelling at me. I eventually stand up and start yelling back. Dad makes an excuse to leave. Dad comes back about a half hour later and starts yelling again, but at this point, it's all I can do to not just laugh. I know that the instant I stand up, the argument will end. It actually wound up being really good for our relationship, because Dad realized that he actually had to make valid points, rather than just going into former drill sergeant mode. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I'll leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I personally had one that I'm quite proud of. I was one of 2 mechanics responsible for an annual inspection on a Piper Arrow fixed-wing prop aircraft. Aside from dismal compression ratios and some odds and ends in the aircraft that could be overlooked by technicality, there was a problem with the main landing gear motor. The down and lock cycle for that aircraft is required by the OEM, and by extension federal law, to be 30 seconds or less across one cycle of the motor. This plane's gear requires 3 to 5 cycles across about 2 minutes to achieve downlock. I told the owner, who was a famously sleazy law, that he can't fly his plane and I won't sign off the annual until the main landing gear are fixed. The law told me to sign off the annual and he'll get to fixing the gear some other time. When I said no, he proceeded to threaten my job and demanded to have the plane back so he could get another mechanic to sign it off as airworthy. I laughed in his face, impounded his aircraft and notified the FAA. The man eventually gave his aircraft to my business I was working for at the time by way of title lien in order to pay off the massive hangar fees he racked up from his plane sitting in my shop. My job right before my current one, property manager. The owner was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude and racist, and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years after, we were a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment of when I said I don't know. I'm not paid to have opinions here. That was a year ago, and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. Ooh, I had a similar one of these. Employer advised she was shocked when I put in a notice. I calmly explained I'm not sure why. It was your idea. You could have heard a pin drop when I reminded her that she told me 3 months before that if I wasn't happy with a certain situation then maybe I should leave. Play B games, win B prizes. My parents came to visit and my mother, who is very old-fashioned, the woman should be a homemaker and if not she shouldn't out-earn the man kind of old-fashioned, told my wife, who makes stacks as a dev team manager compared to my peanuts as a sports writer. You know dear, you really should try to keep a cleaner house. And without looking up from her making lunch, my wife said, yeah, your son forgot to clean this week before you guys flew, and the stunned look on my mom's face was priceless. When my manager at McDonald's gets into beef fights with all the aggressive toxic customers and booting them out the store by calling them all security if they refuse to leave. Actually sounds like a good manager. My wife and I moved to WA state and my mill tried to tell me that she was going to call the police because I had pot in the house. Ha, unless she's calling the D, that won't work. When I was still a child, I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride knowing that they're still indebted to them and had nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents, they move to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berate my dad for living in such a shanty house and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad weren't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. Should have played monarchy instead, as long as you don't have a guillotine in your class. Some White House lady sat at my bar and tried to get a drink without it. She pulled out her White House ID card which had no dob. I work at the White House. I told her that her bosses would be very proud of me enforcing their laws when I didn't serve her a drink. The federal government is such an enormous employer, especially in the DMV area, where I'm guessing this was. I don't understand why people think working for them gets you special treatment. When my crappy father kicked me out of the house and then demanded he have access to my bank to control my financial situation, and I got to tell him, you have no control over me anymore. You set me free when you kicked me out and now you can't do crap. I already posted one more short one. I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an abusive prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week, threw me in a pool when I was small and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid and your own mother doesn't give a crap how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said, "Go ahead, tough guy. Hit me as hard as you can," right in the gut, thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment and I knew it. He was a small man, 5 feet 6 inches. I was at least as tall as him already, and as he gave me his crap-eating grin, I pulled my fist back and freaking belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was freaking pee. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. "You told him to do it. If you weren't ready, it's your fault, not his." One of the most satisfying moments of my life, and one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. He probably realized you could lay him out if he kept up his crap. My dad was like that. Didn't stop mad dogging my exes until my 6 feet 2 inches 240 pounds husband came along, and my dad was perfectly respectful to him. 15 years ago, I worked for a company in Germany that was bought by a large US company. One of the first actions was a mandatory HR meeting. They used their US PowerPoint deck and guided us through the rules and regulations, although directed by our local HR team to not do that. Here are some of the highlights. We are not allowed to accept tickets for the Super Bowl. Utterly confusion. 90% of the people had never heard of the Super Bowl. A discussion about why we would want to watch that anyways started. We are not allowed to have relationship with anybody from a supplier or within the company. Uproar in the room. This is against the German constitution. What you do in your free time is none of their business. The discussion gets heated. Everybody is discussing. The Americans on the line are very confused why. The head of QA finally gets up and shouts, "If I love that woman, nobody will prevent me from dating her." People signed the sheet that they participated and read and understood the presentation with reservations. People start discussing where to sign up for legal expenses insurance. HR refrained from that day from having mandatory global HR meetings. Management tried a couple of other stuff. At will employment against the law. Everybody has a contract. Cutting vacation against the law. Canceling bank holidays. Against the law. Make people work on vacation days. Guess what? Against the law. And a couple more. It was a prime example of cultural ignorance and incredible funny. Edit. Wow. Thank you for the awards and votes. Lots of American companies have rules about not dating co-workers, but they don't have any authority to enforce them other than finding other reasons to dismiss you. Edit. Yes, I know about at will employment. The issue being that in corporate, the person firing doesn't always have the authority to do so without paper trail approval. Also, many businesses have their own rules in place. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him and he just starts unloading cursing, name calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the frick I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money if I'm busy being yelled at. I'm not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. This is my next big power move at work. I am working from home, so the next time my boss starts screaming at me, I'm just going to use my best teacher voice to say, when you can match my tone, I will be happy to have this conversation with you, and then I will hang up the call. I work at a hotel. It's high end, so we often take the approach of just appeasing guests no matter what, so I frequently have to bite my tongue. However, we have a very desirable parking lot, and when people poach it we boot them. I love enforcing these, because I don't have to bite my tongue or apologize, as they aren't guests. My favorite one was this. Girl parks and walks to neighbor hotel. Our GM happens to be in the lot and says, hey, just for your information, this is parking for X hotel, not Z hotel. She proceeds to say frick you, flips him off, and walks into neighbor hotel. GM calls me and tells me. I giggle, grab the boot and slap it on her car. She comes back screaming and ranting. I tell her the cost is $200. She calls the police. The police ask, is this a private lot? Yes. Okay, then pay them. She refuses to pay and storms off. I get a call requesting the manager. I speak with them. It's the girl's mom. She is trying to say, oh, my daughter didn't know. She was for a job interview, yada yada. I let her go on, and when she finally stops making excuses, I tell her that her daughter flipped off the GM, and there is no way the boot is coming off without payment. On top of that, I tell her when she pays she better not come in swearing or yelling, or the price goes up to $300. She hangs up. The daughter comes back and silently hands me $200, with a look of rage on her face. I've never been so internally giggly before. One of my jobs is in a hotel restaurant bar. A guest came into the bar after having been refused service at our sister hotel down the road. He was very drunk and had been rude, abusive and threatening to the staff. He insisted we serve him as he was a guest, but we'd already been phoned by our sister hotel so they could let us know what the situation was. We refused, but offered him some water and suggested he go up to his room. He then went on about how he had nearly bought our hotel and that he was practically our boss, so we should serve him or he'd have us fired. We refused. He told us he was a very rich man and would tip us hundreds of pounds if we served him. We refused. He was getting abusive at this point, so we again suggested he have some water and head up to his room. He went on to tell us that his brother was the mayor so we should serve him. We refused and told him he should go on up to his room yet again. He then said he was going to the pub across the street, but all the pubs restaurants in our town have a barred from their mall policy. We telephoned the other pubs to inform them of the situation. Many of them got back to us and said they had been offered money, been threatened with losing their jobs, and also told the story of the mayor. All of the pubs stuck to their guns and refused to serve him. Eventually, he came back to the hotel and went to his room. Unfortunately, he was the High King of Skyrim. New director decides admin should hold a meeting at noon MF in the nurses' lunchroom and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response: Please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break. No response. His peers and higher ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up in so many levels. At my last job they decided to hold the quarterly meetings in the break room. So every quarter the break room was off limits the whole week. They also decided to hire a catering company for their meetings. The catering company would install themselves on the kitchen. So we didn't have access to neither the break room or the kitchen. Frick those guys. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.